The most amazing piece of machinery on the planet, which is the human body. And in this lecture we're going to be looking at the liver, and we're going to be looking at the kidneys and the skin. So let's have a look at the liver. The liver lives under your right rib, and your liver is the largest internal organ, and your liver is the only organ that has the ability to regrow. And cancer cannot get a hold on the body if the liver is working in optimum performance. So just that piece of information alone makes the liver an incredibly important organ. Here's liver. Now the liver is called the project manager because everything that comes into the body goes first to the liver. So what we looked at in our last lecture, we had a look at how the food is broken down into tiny little particles and absorbed into the blood. Now I want to show you what happens once it's in the blood. So once it's in the blood, it goes on the M1 main highway portal vein straight to the project manager, the liver. And I want to do an assessment of what most people in the Western world eat today. And never in the history of mankind have human beings eaten so many carbohydrates. So I'd like to do a carbohydrate assessment. So most people in the Western world today eat cereal for breakfast, is that right? Cereal. We know it's a popular food because there's a whole aisle devoted to it. There's also a whole aisle devoted to bread. And because these two foods don't take you very far, by mid-morning most people are reaching for cakes, biscuits, cookies, donuts, yeah? And Australians love their pies, and Europeans have introduced us to pizza and pasta. And Asians eat a lot of rice. My husband's an Irishman, so every main meal has to contain potatoes. And last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallized acid that's been extracted from the sugarcane plant. Would you agree with me that we've become high carbohydrate consumers? Now, as I just showed you, all of these foods break down in the gastrointestinal tract to glucose. That's the singular structure that is the result of the breakdown of our starches, our carbohydrates. And then that glucose gets absorbed into the blood. And then it gets sent to the project manager, liver. And the first thing the liver will do with the glucose is it'll send it to the cell. So let's go to the CBD, the central business district of the human body, and have a look at what happens once the glucose goes into the cell. It goes into the cell under the action of insulin. Insulin is the key that unlocks the door to let the glucose inside the cell. And when it gets into the cell, it goes through the 20-step pathway, which gives us 2 units of energy. The end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And as the chemical form of glucose, pyruvate gets fed into what's called the powerhouse. Called the powerhouse because this 8-step pathway gives us this impressive 36 units of energy. And as I showed you this morning, this is the oxygen pathway. This is no oxygen. So that's the first place that the liver will send the glucose, is to the cell, to go through the energy pathways to be burnt as fuel. The second place it is sent is to be stored as glycogen. Now this morning we talked about it. Glycogen is quick-release glucose stores. These little molecules of glucose just sitting in the muscle, ready to be plucked. So tomorrow morning, if it's not raining and we're all running up and down hills, where do we get the energy? those little molecules of glucose are plucked and they're already in the cell. It's in the muscle cell. Do you know glycogen in the muscle cell can only be used by the muscle cell? But glycogen is also stored in the liver. Not a lot, but there is a little bit of glycogen stored in the liver, and that glycogen can be sent all through the body. That's a good backup for brain fuel. But on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got glucose left over. And so the third place that the liver stores the glucose is as fat. And on this high carbohydrate diet, what's happening to Westerners today? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Is that right? So as you can see by my illustration, fat doesn't make you fat. What makes you fat? It's the carbohydrates. And as I explained, I can't remember when, maybe it was this morning, when the lady asked about triglycerides, there they are there. It's that stored fat. So the liver, as the project manager, when you break these foods down in the gut and the glucose is sent to the liver determines where it goes. It sends it to the cell first of all, still a lot left over, so then it's stored as glycogen, still a lot left over, and so now the body stores it in the most amazing fuel depot in the human body, which is fat stores. And I also mentioned this morning Dr. Robert Atkins. Now, Dr. Robert Atkins became very famous, but it's a very fascinating story. He was a GP in his 40s, putting on weight. He knew his science. See, what I've shown you here, that's just basic science. He knew that carbohydrates stored as fat. So he theorized if he stopped all carbohydrates, his body would start to live on his fat stores. So what did he eat? He ate 3 cups of vegetables a day. Most people don't realise that that was part of the Atkins diet. He ate lots of protein, meat, butter, cheese, cream, eggs, and meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. It's got a lot of fat in it too. That was the diet. The weight just fell off him because his body started to eat the fat stores. He had heaps of energy because if we're not giving the body this quick release glucose, your liver is able to convert protein and fat to glucose, and your liver is able to break down your fat stores to give the glucose that you need. It's called gluconeogenesis, creating new glucose from the fat stores. So let's have a look at this. The weight's just falling off him. He's got heaps of energy. He's never hungry because these are the 3 foods that keep the food in the stomach longer. Fibre, because it binds up the glucose and slowly releases it. Protein, because as we just saw, protein's broken down in the stomach. And fat, because it coats the food so it takes a little bit longer for the enzymes to get to it. Has he found the perfect diet? Weight's just falling off him. He's got heaps of energy and he's never hungry. Isn't that the best weight loss diet? That you're never hungry? So he went into the medical journals to see if there's anything that had already done any research on this. And you know what he found? He found it was there. He also wanted to look a little bit more at this because he started to put his patients on it. And his cancer patients were going into remission. You see, cancer cells consume 15 times the glucose of any other cell. And of course, on the Atkins diet, they were getting very little free glucose. Dr. Holland, he co-partnered with Doug Kaufman to write the book, The Germ That Causes Cancer. He says, you deprive cancer cells of glucose, they self-destruct. You see, the normal cell, it can wait for the glucose to have the slow breakdown down to here. But cancer cells run up here, fast, consuming huge amounts of glucose. Dr. Otto Warburg got a Nobel Prize in 1931 for proving that cancer cells consume 15 times the glucose of any other cell and they hate oxygen. 1931! But you don't hear that much, do you? And we'll look at that in a minute. Dr. Atkins found that his patients with high cholesterol levels were coming back to normal, and it's not surprising after the lecture we heard this morning. He found his patients with high triglyceride levels were coming back to normal, because remember, it's high carb, stores as triglyceride. His patients with diabetes, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, were coming off their medication. I have found exactly the same thing in our health retreat. Wow, so he went to research this out, and he found that these are the 3 essential food groups. Why are they essential? Fiber's essential because, as you just saw, your colon needs to be swept every day. Protein's essential because 50% of the membrane around every cell in the body is protein. The other day we looked at DNA, the crossword bands made up of protein. Fat is an essential nutrient. Did you hear that? Essential. Body can't function without it. You see, the membrane around every cell in the body is 50% fat, except for the brain cell. That's 70% fat. I believe that this fat-free diet is one of the many deceptions that the enemy of souls has put on human beings. Especially when you realise the enemy of souls wants to take our brain down, and our brain can't function without proper levels of fat. It's a concentrated food. We don't need much, but we need it. Fat is an essential nutrient. What Atkins found in his research that the non-essential food group is actually carbohydrates. There was a program on a documentary called Catalyst in Australia in 2016. It was called Fat or Fiction. And one professor of nutrition, he said, you can live very, very well without 1 dot of carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates are not bad. Got that? They're not bad. It's only when they're overdone and refined. My husband would never forgive me if the potatoes stopped. And you'd probably never ask me back if I said the rice had to stop. No, they're not bad. Only when they're overdone and refined. And don't most people in the Western world do that? I know in Australia, cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwich for lunch, pasta for tea, cakes, cookies, mid-morning, mid-afternoon. That's almost 100% carbohydrates. And on that diet, what people are doing is they're overdoing the non-essential and they're missing out on the essential. No wonder they're sick. So because that's the non-essential, this is the negotiating part of the meal. So the negotiations change depending on your age, depending on your size, depending on your height, depending on your sex, depending on your physical, mental output through the day. But probably where the negotiations play out the largest are health status. So if someone wanted to conquer their diabetes quickly, what would they stop? Carbs. If someone wanted to lose weight quick, what would they stop? Carbs. Someone wanted to conquer their cancer, what would they stop? Carbs. I have seen quite a few people conquer cancer. They've conquered their cancer and now they're eating a bit more carbs. So it's not forever. It's just until you conquer the situation. I had a man do one of our retreats in Alabama, and this was probably nearly 2 years ago now. When he came in, he was in a wheelchair. He was 62. He'd spent $1 million on his health in the last 10 years. The doctors have now given up on him. The reason he was in a wheelchair is because they'd taken the lymph nodes out of his groin in an attempt to find out why he had diabetes. I still can't work that one out. So now, the plane flight, his lymphatic system had swollen right up. So he's in a wheelchair. He had these stretch bandages on that he just paid a fortune for. He was on blood thinning medication, he was on cholesterol, he was on blood pressure, he was on 90 units of insulin a day. He said to me, The doctors have given me up on me. He said, a friend of mine says you can help me. He says, anything you say, I will do. Now, he was a relative of a quite famous politician. He was the CEO of many big companies. And he'd come to this little retreat in the backwoods of Alabama to see an Australian lady to help him. I said, well, you can throw those bandages away, you won't need them. He said, I just paid a fortune for them. I said, sorry about that. I said, I want you to do a little bit of barefoot grass walking, early morning, dewy walking on the grass. I said, I want you to do a minute rebounding every hour, because that is the best lymphatic stimulator to get that fluid through him. So what he did was he ate very little carbohydrate, high amounts of fibre, lots of vegetables, but not many potatoes, generous amounts of protein and fats. Within 2 weeks, he dropped his insulin from 90%, 90 units a day, to 10 units a day. That's it. He emailed me 3 months later. He said, I am off all my medication. He said, I've lost 45 pounds. He said, I am swimming 30 laps a day and I'm cycling 10 miles a day and I rebound every day. And he said, my doctors are astonished. Now, Bobby will not be able to ever run, and he can walk short distances because his lymph nodes are gone. So he will manage that swelling. But he said to me, if I cycle and swim and rebound, he said, I can manage the swelling in my legs. Is he a happy man? How much did he spend on his health in the last 10 years? $1 million. Wow, he could have just about come to the health retreat every 2 months for that. We live in an amazing body with an incredible ability to heal itself once it's given the right conditions. I've had people say, Barbara, you've got many success stories. Have you got any failures? I said, the only failure is on the part of the person to do what you've got to do to get the turnaround. Mm-hmm.
What about growing children?
Growing children?
Yeah.
That's what I fed my growing children. And they grew, and they all grew bigger than me, and that's not hard. But didn't Dr. Atkins advocate meat? He did. So I want to show you how you can do this on a vegetarian diet. So let's go to Genesis 1:29. And in Genesis 1:29, God's telling Adam and Eve what to eat. Can you improve on that Garden of Eden diet? You can't improve on God, can you? So he said, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed. What's a herb-bearing seed? A herb-bearing seed is a grain. A herb-bearing seed is a legume. A herb-bearing seed is a seed. So what's a grain? We've got wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, quinoa, so many grains. Grains are high in protein. And in carbohydrates, they are also high. So let's look at our carbohydrate list. How many of these come from the grain section? Grain, 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 grain. What about legumes? Chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, soybeans, cannellini beans, kidney beans, lentils, so many legumes. If you want to know how to cook legumes, get an Indian cookbook. They certainly know how to cook their legumes. Legumes are high in protein and they are medium to low in carbohydrates. The fact is, legumes are about 1/3 the carbohydrate that you will find in the grain. And if you look at low-carb books, paleo diets, things like that, they say don't eat legumes, they've got carbs. Well, they have, but not much. Seed. Pumpkin seed, sesame seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, flax seed or linseed. Seeds are high in protein and they are quite low in carbohydrate. God said, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree, in the which of the tree is a fruit-bearing seed. What's your fruit-bearing seed? That's your nut. Nuts are high in protein and low in carbohydrate. So almonds, Brazil nuts, hazelnuts. You've also got pecan nuts, walnuts, macadamia nuts. A peanut is not a nut. A peanut is a legume. And because they grow in the ground, they mould very easily. I don't eat peanuts. Now, if you're a lover of peanut butter, I've got some good news. Macadamia butter, cashew butter, almond butter, they're just as nice. And if we make a satay at our retreat, we use roasted almonds instead of peanuts. So how you can do the low-carb diet with generous amounts of protein, fibre and fat is to increase your seed, nut, legume part of your meal and decrease your grain part of the meal. Growing children can certainly use more carbohydrates. But as we've looked at this week, there is one carbohydrate that's causing a lot of obesity in children today, and we'll use our blue to do it, and that's wheat. How many of these are made from wheat? Wheat. So there's wheat, 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 wheat. So the majority of the carbohydrates that people are eating come from wheat. I met a man in New Zealand, I was there last week, a couple of weeks ago. He said to me, do you know, my son had eczema, he had allergies. We took him to a naturopath who took him off the wheat and took him off the dairy. He said at 15 he was overweight, he had no energy, he couldn't play sports. He said within 3 months he'd lost most of his weight and now he's an athlete, just from stopping the wheat. So he was very interested to hear how the wheat's been hybridised, and that's what's causing all the problems. So you can do this on a vegetarian diet. And Bobby, the guy that had the incredible results with turning his type 1 diabetes completely around, this is the diet he had. Very low carbohydrates, lots of fibre, generous proteins and healthy fats. I met a man when I was in New York a few years ago. His name's Dr. Carl Benjamin, and he was a doctor of chiropractic. He came to me for a consult. I said, what do you do for a job? He said, I'm a chiropractor, and he said, and I'm a qualified nutritionist. I said, what are you coming to see me for? He said, I was one of Dr. Atkins' patients. The man was in his 60s. I said, really? He said, he's a very gracious man. He said, and I believe if Dr. Atkins had read the China study that shows the dangers of meat, he says, I believe Dr. Atkins would have become a vegetarian. That's quite a statement, isn't it? That's quite a statement. You see, Atkins had the right theory. He was the first, well, he was one of the main ones that blew the whistle on the dangers of the high carbohydrate diet. So that's what the liver does with the food that's coming in. So what does the liver do with eliminating environmental poisons? I'm going to explain this as if you are at Misty Mountain Health Retreat and you're on a 2-day juice fast. And what happens when you're on a juice fast is we're not giving you enough food to run on. We give you a juice every 2 hours. So your body starts breaking down fat stores to give the glucose that you need, but something else a little bit more sinister is being released. You see, all through our life, we are taking in environmental poisons. When we're in the city, environmental poisons. One lady talked about walking to work and walking past people that are smoking. Every time I fly, you're getting environmental poisons. But praise be to God, He's given us a liver that can deal with all of that. So when these environmental poisons come into your body, they come to the liver. Remember, He's the project manager, and He looks at it and says, nasty guy, wrap it up in fat and store it. wrap it up in fat and store it. Then you come to Misty Mountain Health Retreat, the body starts breaking down the fat stores to give the glucose, and that environmental poison is once again released. That environmental poison is most of the time a fat soluble. It's a fat soluble, sorry the spelling's getting a bit bad here, soluble. It's a fat soluble toxin. Now your body cannot release a fat soluble toxin. It has to be broken down to a water soluble state. Then it can be sweated out, then it can be urinated out. So I'm going to give a symbol for this fat soluble toxin. There it is there. Now stage 1 of breaking down that fat soluble toxin to a water soluble state, it begins when a person is fasting. And in stage 1, the liver takes this fat soluble toxin and it breaks it down to a metabolite. A metabolite basically means the first stage of breakdown, or this first stage of metabolism. And this metabolite is more toxic than it originally was. This metabolite is highly volatile. This metabolite creates a lot of free radicals. And this metabolite is sometimes 100 times more toxic than it originally was. And you might comment and say, well, what's the body doing? What's the liver doing? It's just created something worse than it originally was. It's a process. It's like when you're cleaning the kitchen cupboards out. The kitchen looks 100 times messier than when you started halfway through. So your liver has certain needs at this stage. So what your liver needs as it goes through stage 1, it needs antioxidants. And antioxidants are given a nickname. They're free radical scavengers. They actually mop up all the free radicals. What's the most potent antioxidants? It's beta-carotene. And beta-carotene is found in all your orange-coloured vegetables and your green-coloured vegetables. So we had quite a nice supply of beta-carotenes at lunchtime, didn't we? Another antioxidant, quite famous one, is vitamin C. Vitamin C is not ascorbic acid. When you buy vitamin C, you should buy ascorbic acid with bioflavonoids. You need the whole C. Another potent antioxidant is vitamin E. Vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin. So we give our guests a protein drink every second juice. And that protein drink has got some almond milk and coconut cream in it. We make it with a pea protein, so there's their vitamin E's. Now within 36 hours of starting a detox fast, stage 2 kicks in. And in stage 2, the liver takes this highly toxic, highly volatile metabolite and joins it together with an amino acid. The union of this highly toxic metabolite and the amino acid produces the water-soluble state. And that water-soluble state, here's its symbol, wave in a box. That water-soluble state can be easily released out of the body. So stage 2 basically happens in conjunction with, stage 3 happens in conjunction with stage 2. And in stage 3, this water-soluble state is released out via your urine. It's released out via your sweat glands. It's released out via your colon. And that's why we give our guests a steam bath every afternoon at our health retreat. Because the steam bath allows them to have a really good sweat and sweat out all these water-soluble toxins. Now, this information that I have given you was not known until 2002. So I think Dr. Atkins died before this was known. It also explains why his book was #1 on the New York Times best-selling book list 4 years running. Nutritionists and doctors hated him, but the public loved him. You know why? It worked. It worked. So what's the need that stage 2 has? It needs protein. How many people go on a fast and take protein? Not many. But protein is essential. You see, we are dealing with more fat-soluble toxins than any generation that ever lived on the planet. So you know what that means? We need more protein than any generation that lived on the planet. I do not advocate a high protein diet. I advocate high fibre, lots of vegetables, generous protein. Because we're not going to live on lentils, nuts and seeds, are we? It wouldn't be a pleasant diet, would it? So protein is necessary. What does stage 3 need? It needs healthy fats to keep those cells nice and supple. So once again showing the 3 essentials. Remember the 3 essentials? Fibre, high fibre, generous protein, and healthy fats. And when you look at the diet in the Garden of Eden, with the seed, to you it shall be for meat, do you know, the seed, to you it shall be for meat, what does that mean? It means that should be the main substance of your diet. Unfortunately today, people are overdoing one seed. It's called wheat, and that's the one that's been hybridized. I was interested to read in Florence Nightingale, famous nurse, that when she found some patient that was very, very sick, they responded to 2 things, beef tea and raw milk. Now, what do beef tea and raw milk both contain? Protein and fat. Well, I'm not advocating beef tea and raw milk, but I'm sure the beef tea and the raw milk in the mid-1800s was a bit healthier than it today. There's no need. What we give our guests is pea protein powder when they're fasting. I don't take a protein powder. I don't need to, because I have a diet that's high in fibre, generous protein and healthy fats. Within 36 hours of starting a detox program, phase 2 kicks in. I've already said that. But within 48 hours of doing a detox program, if you don't supply any protein, the liver can suffer 25% liver function loss. You see, if you're on a detox program and you're starting to release environmental poisons and you're not supplying the protein, the liver goes, whoa, quick, we're going to have to start breaking down and supplying the amino acids that are necessary to mop up these nasty guys. 25% liver function loss? The project manager's gone down. I have found that since we've been implementing a protein supplement every second juice, people are not getting sick with the detox. And I know now why. Is because we're providing the amino acids to mop up all the toxic metabolites. This explains why it is dangerous to go on long fasts today. You're far better to do 2 days a week. Because if you go on a 7-day fast, you can release so many toxic metabolites that you can get sicker than when you started. Are there any questions? Yes.
I was wondering what you have for breakfast if you don't take bread or cereal.
Do you know you can take bread and cereal, it's just not in high amounts. So let's say for breakfast you have millet or you have oats. If you have chia seed on top of that and some ground flaxseed and some coconut milk and also nuts and seeds and some fruit, that is a meal that is high in fibre with quite generous proteins and healthy fats. Whereas what I have for breakfast, this is what I usually have. I usually have papaya, and I usually have about a tablespoon of chia seed, and I usually have almonds and Brazil nuts, and then I have a slice of sourdough spelt bread with olive oil, cayenne pepper, avocado, and brown lentils on top, or red lentils on top, or black-eyed beans, or scrambled tofu. That's what I have for breakfast, and I love that breakfast. And I don't even think about food for about 6 hours after that. So basically, everyone has to eat what they like. It's no use eating what you don't like. I don't cook a porridge for breakfast because my husband and I, we're not fussed on that. But if you like a porridge for breakfast, you can boost your protein by putting in the seeds and nuts. You had a question?
How do you actually cook your protein? Because it's very hard to actually cook the beans. So how do you handle the protein?
I don't find it hard to cook beans.
It's like it takes a long time to boil.
Oh, not lentils or black-eyed beans. See, the reason I have red lentils or brown lentils or black-eyed beans in the morning is because they're so quick. I don't do chickpeas in the morning because that's going to take me 5 hours. I don't do red kidney beans because they're going to take me 5 hours. I just choose the quick ones. Now, I wake at 5, walk at 6, and eat at 7. So when I wake up in the morning, if I'm going to do black-eyed beans or lentils, I put them on and I just put them on a slow cook. So by the time I get back from my walk, they're cooked. And I rinse them and then put flavourings with them. If I do red lentils, I just soak them because they're almost cooked as soon as you bring them to the boil. So I don't cook them until I'm back from my morning walk. Scrambled tofu, that takes me about 10 minutes at the very most to prepare. So you see, I'm not in being in the kitchen for hours in the morning. I've got mountains to climb and people to pray for and Bible to read. So I like my breakfast to be fairly quick and easy. So as I mentioned, I think this morning, if you like a porridge, do it in your crock pot overnight. Do your rice in your crock pot overnight. One of the meals that we serve at Misty at breakfast is brown rice, and we cook it first and then we mix it with a cashew milk and bake it, and the guests very much like that. So that's having rice as like a porridge. So you can have a millet porridge, an oat porridge, a quinoa porridge, a brown rice porridge. There's a variety of grains. If you like buckwheat, you can have buckwheat. So the breakfast is you've got to eat what you like. And it's not that bread and cereal are bad, it's only when they're overdone. Whereas if you have cereal and toast for breakfast, that's actually overloading your carbohydrates a bit. Although my grandsons, when they come, I always make the porridge because they love porridge. So I do either oat and buckwheat, or I do millet, or I might do quinoa, so I do a variety. And they have chopped up banana in that, bit of honey, organic soy milk. And then they also have a slice of sourdough toast, spelt, with avocado and brown lentils on top. That's a nice hearty breakfast for growing children, and they usually have an apple and some nuts. Do you know, I go off to work and they go and play in the creek all day. And they start appearing about 1:30. They're getting hungry. And what do they have for lunch? Well, we have a big salad and we have baked vegetables, because my husband's an Irishman, loves baked potatoes, and sometimes baked sweet potato, baked pumpkin. And then I usually do another legume dish, and I'll do something like chickpeas or lima beans or Kidney beans, because they take a while, and I just have them on the back of the stove, slowly cooking all morning. And so when I get home, often I'm in the kitchen at 12, and I serve lunch at 1:30. And I rinse the legumes, and then I'll make a lovely rich sauce and cook them a little bit more in the sauce while the baked veggies are cooking. Yes?
Some people are against eating legumes because they find that it gives them a lot of gas in the stomach.
If people have gas from legumes, it's usually because they're not rinsed enough. See, when I was in Tennessee, what they do is they cook the legumes, and then halfway through they put onion and flavourings in, and that water, there's all your gas. So what I do is I cook my legumes in this pot, and then I've got my sauce in the other pot. And when the legumes are 3/4 cooked, depending on the legume, I rinse them 3 or 4 times, because that's dirty water. And then I put those legumes in the sauce, and then I let that cook for maybe half an hour, depending on the legumes. You see, that water is dirty water. You know, when you bring your legumes to the boil and there's all that froth on top, what do you think that froth is? Wind. That's what'll give you wind. Yes?
Well, will ginger help by putting ginger in instead?
Yeah, ginger can help, but throwing the dirty water away eliminates the problem. Yeah?
So-called dirty water is not
Pardon?
the dirty water, which you say when you cook your legumes, you get all the froth. But if you are also cooking your legumes for a long time, so doesn't the minerals and nutrients?
No. I never throw the water away that my vegetables cook in, but you're looking at a dried bean here. You see that? And that's the dirty water coming from the dried beans. But it's nice to cook your beans in a sauce so they take the flavour. So that's why I'll half cook them or 3/4 cook them, depending on them. And then the last part of the cooking happens with all the flavourings. And then, you know, say you're doing a dal or you're doing a Mexican tomato-y thing. It's nice to have them cooking in that. So what about if you're going to do soup? If you do soup, soak your legumes and then rinse them, and then bring them to the boil and rinse them again, and then put them in your soup pot and let them have a long, slow cook. So most people that have wind or problem with legumes, it's because they're not prepared properly. If they still have problem, they probably need to boost their hydrochloric acid. Because if you've got nice, strong hydrochloric acid, it'll break it down well. Yes?
Think of pressure cooked food and microwave food.
Microwave food changes the molecular structure of the food, so when you eat it, the body doesn't recognise those molecules. So microwave's dangerous. Do you know many European countries have banned microwaves? Microwaves do have a place though. You can put them in your laundry to heat your wheat bag. But I think in Saigon and Malaysia you don't use wheat bags because it never gets that cold. Now pressure cooker can be very handy for beans that take a long time. I bought some chickpeas once and I had to cook them for 8 hours before they got soft. But in the pressure cooker, 40 minutes. So I know our staff in the kitchen, our cooks, they pressure cook the long beans. You don't need to pressure cook black-eyed beans or brown lentils or red lentils because they're quick cookers. And that's why I use them for breakfast. But you could just put legumes in a crock pot overnight and have that for breakfast. Yes?
What do you think of intermittent fasting for weight loss?
Intermittent fasting is fantastic. Intermittent fasting, Dr. Michael Mosley talks about it, and I think I mentioned it yesterday. He says just have 2 meals a day. He says miss breakfast and have lunch and your evening meal, but I think that's crazy. There's no use having a huge meal at night and then going to bed because then the body has to store the nutrients. It makes much more sense to have a generous breakfast and a generous lunch and then eliminate the evening meal. Now, because we're so busy in class most of the day and even in the evening, we're having an evening meal. But when you go home, that is something you certainly can try. Yes?
had a friend who went for fasting, first 5 days water fast, then something about next 5 days was recovery before you get back to the normal. Is that recommended?
That's very dangerous. Can you see why? If you do a water fast, you're releasing these fat-soluble toxins, no antioxidants to mop them up, no protein to mop them up. Someone can be sicker than when they started. It's too dangerous today. You could do it 100 years ago because we weren't dealing with the fat-soluble toxins that we're dealing with today. So you will find that people can get sicker than when they started. There is a DVD going round called Fat, Sick, Ugly and Nearly Dead. Have you seen that one? This guy went on a 30-day fast and he went from being this big to a lot slimmer. I think the juices he had some protein in them, and I think he mustn't have had a lot of environmental poisons in him to be able to cope with it. But not everyone could do that. If a person's been in war, especially the Vietnam War where they were exposed to a lot of chemicals, if a person's a cleaner where they've been exposed to chemicals, if a person's a farmer who's been exposed to a lot of chemicals, they have to be very, very careful because as their fat stores get broken down, can you imagine the toxins that are released? So if I get a Vietnam veteran do our program, I give them protein every single juice because they've got a lot of nasty stuff coming out of them. Yes?
What causes fatty liver?
What causes fatty liver? Interesting question. It's fructose. When fruit breaks down, it breaks down to glucose and fructose. Sugar is half fructose and glucose. So a lot of fruit juices, they got high fructose and they got sugar in them, which is another fructose and glucose. And a lot of cakes, biscuits, croissants, donuts, things like that, they're sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. Have you heard of high fructose corn syrup? People see high fructose corn syrup and they think, well, that sounds healthy. Fructose, fruit, syrup, oh, that's you know, that sounds all right. But you know, it's one of the most dangerous sweeteners there are. It's so cheap. That's why they use it. Now, when you've got someone with a fructose overload, now the fruit that we had at breakfast this morning, even having a plate of that will not overdo your fructose. But let's say someone has fruit juice and then croissant and then jam on top, that's fructose and glucose too. That all breaks down in the body and then gets taken to the liver, as I've just shown you. Now the liver is the only organ with fructose receptor sites. So the fruit that we had this morning for breakfast, the fructose went to the liver and the liver converted the fructose to glucose and then sends it to the cell. But if someone had an overload of fructose, had a lot of breads and croissants and jams and fruit juices, fructose overload, all that fructose goes to the liver and it's too much fructose. The liver cannot convert it all to glucose, so it stores it as fat on the liver. There's your fatty liver. Fructose overload. Alcoholics get fatty liver, a lot of fructose in alcohol. Very toxic to the liver, alcohol. So that explains why you get people today who aren't drinking alcohol, but they've got fatty liver. If a person stops the high fructose diet, drops their carbohydrates right down, starts to live the way you're hearing this week, do you know in a matter of about a month, their fatty liver can be resolved. This information's only been known since 2002. I gave this lecture in America one year and a man said to me, this information is not for your lay people, it's for your academics. I said, lay people have livers too, you know. It's important information, isn't it? It's important information for us people living in the last days, really, of this Earth's history. We've got a toxic planet. The Bible says the whole creation groans under the curse of sin. But I praise God every day that He has given us a liver that is able to detoxify us from environmental poisons, if it's given the right conditions, yes?
You eat nuts. Do you eat raw nuts is better, or you bake it will be better?
We need to eat nuts the way God gave them to us, which is raw. When you cook the nuts and roast the nuts, you change the structure. Pardon? Yeah, you can eat cashews raw. Cashews actually aren't a raw nut because the cashew pod has to be boiled to open it to get the cashew out. So people that eat a raw diet, they often don't consider cashews raw. As long as you chew them to a milk, chew them very, very well and allow the enzymes to work with them. Yes? I guess it depends what the carbohydrates are, but it's fructose that causes it. So a lot of people that have a high carbohydrate diet, cereal has sugar in it, bread has sugar in it, cakes have got a lot of sugar in it, and a lot of people that eat bread put jam on top. See how and a lot of them have high fructose corn syrup in them. So your question, can a high carbohydrate diet cause it? In a way it could.
Refined as well, refined carbohydrates.
Refined carbohydrates. There's a big difference between refined and complex, but you can still overdo the complex carbohydrates. See, most people are sick through ignorance. Most people don't realise what they're doing. And I can understand, we're such a fast society today, and that is just fast. It is just there, and it is just easy. And when I talked about the mind last night, I talked about the frontal lobe. Do you know the highest function of frontal lobe is foresight? So of an afternoon, you've got to think about breakfast the next day. Do you need to put a crock pot on? Do you need to soak your legumes for lunch the next day? It doesn't take long. How long does it take to put a crock pot on? How long does it take to pour your lentils into a pot and put some water in it and soak them overnight? Not much. Not much. Just a little bit of foresight can actually help. The worst time to think about cooking a meal is when you're very hungry. And the worst time to shop is when you're very hungry. Is that right? Yeah.
How do you know you have fatty liver and what do you do?
How do you know you got fatty liver? You don't. You don't have to know. Because if you've got fatty liver and you eat like this, it'll be resolved. If there's a problem in your body will knock. It'll tell you there's a problem. Yeah? How about gout? A high acid diet can cause gout. So high carbohydrate. All of these foods here are acid-forming foods. Potatoes are only acid-forming if they're deep-fried in 2-week-old oil. So it's the high acid diet that's causing is the biggest cause of your gout and arthritis.
Talking about gout, they always saying that soybeans that you shouldn't eat if you have gout. But someone says that it's not the soybean.
Well, you shouldn't eat soybeans if you've got gout. Well, I don't know anyone that eats soybeans 3 times a day. Do you know what I mean? For me, soy is a small part of my diet. It depends how much. I'm sure if you ate 3 cups of soybeans a day, it would hurt your gout. But I'm sure if you had half a cup 3 times a week, it wouldn't cause your gout. It's like people say to me, Barbara, you shouldn't be advocating soybean. It's high in anti-nutrients. I say, yeah, if you're eating 3 buckets of soybeans a day, but no one's eating 3 buckets of soybeans a day. And the dairy industry are not happy about the amount of soy milk and soybeans people are eating. And so they put out information that tries and damns it. We've got a book in our library, it's called Serial Killer. Serial Killer. And it shows in that book that one in 3 children by the age of 3 are overweight or obese in America. And 93% of American children have cereal for breakfast. and 30% of those cereals is mostly sugar, we've got a huge problem. In fact, children are being groomed to be diabetics.
And the problem is they don't eat other things except that.
That's all they eat, yeah. Do you know, I know, having raised 8 children, the children will live on bread if you let them. So I never put bread on the table till they'd eaten all their dinner. Then they could have a slice of bread with olive oil and honey. It's a reward. You put bread on the table, that's all they'll eat. As I often say, you can read them like a book. They're all the same.
So a friend who has gout, and she claims that she cannot touch any beans, not tofu, not soy milk, not even a tiny bit, but she will eat a lot of meat. And meat is
Meat's much higher acid, that's true. Yes?
You mentioned about nuts. We should eat it in its raw form. Because cooking it, you change the molecular structure. Now then, the question is, what about beans? Why don't you just eat raw? Because one thing, how do we know when we cook something and when we eat something raw?
Your palate will tell you. Because raw beans are not nice. Raw nuts are very nice.
But what happens, some people say that, well, they find roasted beef nuts nicer because it's a matter of quite subjective, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because nuts can be, one thing is roasted nut is a taste better, so therefore...
So then we need to actually investigate what's happening to the oils when you heat them. Now there are a few dishes that we lightly roast nuts to get a certain flavour, but it's not the odd dish that you have a little bit of roasted nut in, or the odd time you don't. It's what you eat every day that matters. And heating does change the structure of oils. So we serve, it's called a Thai salad. It's a curry rice, and then we cook cubed tofu that's been rolled in seasonings in coconut oil, so it's sort of crispy. And then we have a big stir-fry vegetable, and then we have salad. So they pile that up on the plate, and all over the top they put a satay sauce. And this has got kaffir lime leaf and coconut cream in it, and ginger and garlic, and roasted almond gives the satay sauce. But you see, it's not much. It's just a little bit to get a certain flavour. So you might roast for a certain flavour in a dish, but as long as most of the nuts that you eat are raw. If that helps. Yes?
Since the body, the liver detoxifies through excreting through urine, sweat, and colon. So if you have a skin problem, if you have a skin acne breakout, is that a sign that you're not handling the detoxification process?
It can be. It can be. You would use the process of elimination with skin diseases. I find in about 98% of cases, most skin diseases are due to intolerance to wheat and dairy. I've seen, in fact, every baby that comes to me with eczema, we get the mother to stop eating wheat and dairy, and within 2 months the baby is clear. I've had mothers say, Barbara, I'm doing this, it's a month, there's no change. I said, little bit longer, little bit longer. At 2 months, I get photographs. Baby has no more eczema.
What about young people with acne problems?
With what?
Acne.
It's usually a hormonal imbalance, and I think we're talking about that tonight, is that right? Yeah, because you'll find that the acne begins at puberty. So it's the hormones. And so tonight in the lecture I'll be showing you how you can balance the hormones.
I know of a 4-year-old girl, she won't eat anything except cereal, cookies.
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
See, what a 4-year-old girl will eat nothing but cereal and cookies. Well, we need to talk to the mother,
Can't help.
because the mother is feeding the child. It's amazing what children will eat when they're hungry. So what you do is you take them on a great big bushwalk up a hill and you forget the picnic lunch. And then when you get back, they are very, very hungry, and the only thing on the table is salad and lentils. You'd be amazed what they eat. And if they say, I don't want to eat that, you know what I say? Okay. See the smile? Okay. Gee, they're going to be hungry at breakfast, and guess what's on the table? Fruit, maybe some brown rice, coconut. I don't want to eat that. Okay. You'd be amazed what they eat when they get hungry. But what you've got to do is you've got to have everything out of the house that they can't eat or they shouldn't eat. And it's amazing how quickly they'll start to eat the good food. That's why I say we've got to talk to the mother, because the mother's the one that's supplying the food. Yes, I think time's up. So I'll say a prayer and we'll finish. Father in heaven, thank you again for teaching us. And we pray that you will continue to be close to us and guide us and help us to remember the things we're learning, for we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.